CNN Money Switzerland is designed to flow through information from the heart of Europe. Watch CNN Money Switzerland.
Let's talk about Nigeria and its oil. Nigeria is Africa's top oil producer, and oil is the government's biggest source of revenue. But the economy has been struggling, and poverty levels are on the rise.
The poverty of those living around the source of Nigeria's wealth is bare to see.
So why can't Nigerians depend on their country's oil wealth? What happens to all that money? Nigeria also has a lot of natural resources: minerals, gold, and oil. Lots of oil. It's got the second largest proven reserves on the African continent and is the 12th largest producer worldwide. And yet, many Nigerians have it hard. World Poverty Clock says 90 million people live not just in poverty, but extreme poverty. That's 48% of the population. Compare that to 24% in Ethiopia and 16% in Kenya, and they don't even have oil.
Despite Nigeria's vast oil wealth, half its population lives on less than $2 a day.
Nigerian experts say not a huge slice of that revenue gets to the people.
The focus should be of the money that the Nigerian government gets, how much is reinvested into the lives of the people.
They're still using some of that oil revenue to pay off debts and the rest to pay salaries to the lawmakers. So things like schools, hospital, infrastructure, much needed infrastructure does not get built.
Okay, so where does that revenue go? Let's follow the money and the oil. Nigerian crude is found right here under the waterways of the Niger Delta. A few Nigerian companies operate there, but the ones doing most of the exploring and extracting are international companies. Shell is one of the big ones. It provides 40% of Nigeria's oil production. But because Nigeria doesn't have the infrastructure to refine its own crude oil, these foreign companies sell it abroad. And in the end, Nigeria has to import billions of dollars worth of refined oil back in.
Multinational actually extracts the oil. So if they think that refining the oil in Switzerland or refining it in the United States will help them lower costs, definitely that's where they will do it, because the capacity to refine it isn't there in Nigeria.
It means that there's a huge lack of transparency, that a lot of transactions are happening under a cloak of obscurity. You cannot be both a regulator and a player. You can't be a referee and a player as well. It just doesn't make any sense.
That lack of transparency has led to corruption in the oil sector. Billions of dollars in oil money have gone missing over the years. One of the most infamous cases was back in 2016.
It was reported that $16 billion in oil revenue had just gone missing. And this money was supposed to be given from NNPC and sent to the National Treasury. But the money was not sent over. So every few years in Nigerian headlines, you see things like 16 billion missing, 30 billion missing.
The human rights group Amnesty International says oil companies are also responsible for the spills and accuse them of misleading and neglecting local communities. Remember Aliko Dangote, Africa's richest man? He's building a new refinery near Lagos.
We have to make sure that oil is actually refined within Nigeria, and that will help reduce importing the refined petroleum products into the country.
Nigeria's oil reserves have made it the biggest economy in Africa. I wanted to show how oil thieves were basically running that part of Nigeria. The idea was to try and get access to these people so that they could show us what they were doing.
You have huge oil companies that are making billions and billions of dollars, and it's not filtering down to the poor. And they are really, really disillusioned. They are angry.
I love Nigeria. My sister was born there. My parents met and married there. I spent my early childhood there, so I love Nigeria.
The Niger Delta is on the coast.
It's a vast area that is interwoven by a latticework of waterways.
It is rich in these natural resources, in particular the black gold, oil. And yet the people are pitifully poor. Plus, there's an incredibly high degree of corruption.
There's a lot of animosity in the region because of all the wealth that is generated there, and so little of it is pumped back into the area.
We were totally unprepared for how bad it was. It was shocking beyond shocking.
The Niger Delta has some of the biggest oil fields in the world. It's a dangerous place of guns and poverty, where people need development, and the environment is heavily polluted from 50 years of living with the oil industry.
Just a few hundred yards over there is the Joint Task Force. That's the military's station. It's impossible to know exactly what was going on, but the likelihood is that oil was being stolen in a very, very large way, right under the noses of the authorities, and perhaps with the collusion of the authorities.
In the days following the explosion, a team was assembled to investigate what happened. Catholic priest Father Obi was invited to join this official investigation.
From the very moment I got to the area, I was suspicious, because I wondered why a site that should have been well protected, the JTF were probably 70 meters from the scene, because I could see their houseboat from the scene of the fire.
The military were within 70 meters?
They were at most maybe 100 meters, but I don't think it was up to 100 meters.
So clearly the military knew what was
They
going on.
knew exactly what was going on there. And then also, later on in the investigation, it was clear to me that Shell was aware that this was probably one of the most bunkered points on the
When you say bunkered,
Trans-Niger.
that is where the oil was being tapped off?
Was being tapped off because there is always oil there. And from the investigation, it was clear to us that Shell knew this.
What you're saying is that the company knew,
yes,
the contractors knew,
they knew quite
the
well,
military knew,
yeah.
Everybody
knew and
that this oil was being taken out.
And for me, there was clear complicity from everybody around.
In 2008, faults in the Shell pipeline spilt tens of thousands of barrels of crude into the mangrove swamps, causing total devastation. 5 years later, and people here are still waiting compensation and clean-up. They've lost their fishing grounds and much of their farmland. Oil has been nothing short of a disaster for these people.
This, underneath me, is the Trans-Niger pipeline, the great 24-inch artery of oil which leads from the oil fields here out to the terminal at Bonny down the road. It's not protected. You can see, look, it's right under my feet. If I jump hard enough on it, I'd probably break it myself. This pipeline provides nothing for these communities. They get nothing. They get none of the oil from it. They get none of the money from it. Shell runs this pipeline. Shell is now saying that it needs to make a new pipeline. It's going to spend £1,500 million on a new pipeline to avoid communities like this and sabotage. If it spent a tenth of that money on the communities, you could argue you wouldn't have these problems in the first place. Companies like Shell never did the cleanups, never did or kept their promises,
yes, Yes, they had spillages from equipment failure.
Yeah.
They always deny them and
Yeah.
they charge them as sabotage.
Yeah.
And later people say, okay, everything you're saying is sabotage. Why don't we start sabotaging them at once? You know.
So if Shell had been a good company, if the other oil companies had acted properly,
yes,
you would never have this criminality.
You would not have had this scale. And you would not have had the level of connivance that also went with it. Because, let me put it, silence. It's just spoiled the environment. It used to be a pristine area. You know, you see the mangroves, see the trees, everything.
Ken Saro-Wiwa Jr. is an aide to the president. He knows only too well how the oil industry has failed the people of the Delta.
So who is responsible?
Well, it's a complex network. You can look at the allegations are including commodity traders. We're looking at people who are lifting oil. We're looking at insurance, people who own ships. We're looking at security agencies. We're looking at militant networks. So it goes right across. The value chain is long and complicated.
Are the oil companies implicated?
Well, there are some suggestions, but again, these are things which require proper investigation, and certainly it's not. In the end, it's not so much about pointing fingers, but it's looking for solutions.
Whatever the solution, poverty must be addressed.
One, let them get modular refineries on board. 5,000 liters.
You're arguing for what each community should have its own legal refinery.
Yes, legal refineries at these small stages. Yeah. And then the sale of the crude at domestic price, not at international spot price.
And that would stop the criminality?
It will stop the criminality. Because, of course, where are you stealing it to sell to? Who are you refining it to? When there is legal refinery here, catering for 10,000 liters, who's going to buy that one that you went into the bush to do? Nobody. Because they are sure that it's of a better quality, they are sure that it's well regulated in line with environmental practices. Nobody's going to buy yours that you made.
So it would end the pollution, it would end the criminality, and it would bring prosperity.
It would end everything, and it will bring prosperity.
But some reject oil completely. Nemo Bassi, chair of Oil Watch International, believes that oil in Nigeria has been a disaster for his country.
Oil has been the major factor that has dislocated everything in Nigeria, about Nigerian politics, Nigerian economy, the infrastructure. Before oil, Nigeria was a rich country. Since oil began to be a major income earner, Nigeria has become an impoverished country. Oil should be left in the soil. Coal should be left in the hole. Tar sands should be left in the sand, and there should be no fracking at all. The oil-based civilization has gone on for about 200 years. It's not going to take us to eternity. It's time now for us all around the whole world, rich or poor, to move from this fossil fuel-driven production and consumption system and go the way of renewables.
Remember Aliko Dangote, Africa's richest man? He's building a new refinery near Lagos.
We have to make sure that oil is actually refined within Nigeria, and that will help reduce importing the refined petroleum products into the country.
The red and yellow clamshell logo is known across the entire world. Oil giant Shell, Royal Shell.
Koning Willem-Alexander was daar woensdag aanwezig om het 100-jarig bestaan te vieren. De koning kreeg ook een rondleiding van Shell.
The royal designation demands an impeccable reputation.
At Shell, we all make a commitment to work by our core values, which are honesty, integrity and respect.
But even with these core values, the company has been under fire for years.
What you see is oil. It's crude.
According to Shell, 95% of the leaks are caused by sabotage.
Ik denk dat het smokkelen en stelen van product zo rendabel is geworden dat je kunt dit vergelijken met een drugsorganisatie.
But we receive information about Shell employees in Nigeria who are themselves seemingly involved in criminal activities. Zembla investigates. Shell's hell. Bronsema also tells us that Shell and the Dutch government are well aware of these events. But neither takes action.
Ik vind het schokkend dat het is toch de taak van de Nederlandse overheid om zo'n soort beschuldiging serieus te nemen.
We decided to investigate the findings made by Milieudefensie. What exactly is going on in the Niger Delta? To find out, we need to go back in time.
No, because the oil company did not carry out any kind of environmental impact assessment as to then educate us on the hazard, on the danger. We had cases of bronchitis, we had cases of women, premature births, stillbirths. We had cases of lung cancer, skin cancers. The oil companies have been silently killing us.
Little by little, a fertile region the size of the Netherlands and Belgium is transformed into a stinking moonscape. While the Nigerian government and Royal Shell earn billions of dollars, the locals barely profit at all. On the contrary, Shell's leaking pipelines only make them poorer.
I want you to have deep down in your heart that more than 26 million people are dying from environmental devastation. I want you to consider that and know that for every fuel that you tank in the filling station, it is at the expense of somebody's health.
Shortly after the Zembla episode airs in 2010, Shell reacts to accusations that the company itself is responsible for the leaks.
Ja, niets kon verder van de waarheid zijn, denk ik.
This Shell executive points to criminals and saboteurs.
Je kunt dit vergelijken met een drugsorganisatie. Ook weer veel machtsvertoon, veel wapens, veel handel.
But there's still another group that sabotages the pipeline, the executive claims.
Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Laura Kyle. The main opposition party in Bangladesh has been holding anti-government protests for months. Witnesses say up to 100,000 people turned up to the latest BNP rally in the capital, Dhaka, on Saturday. A poor economy, rising food and fuel prices and power cuts appear to have galvanised long-standing anger at the Prime Minister. The protesters want Sheikh Hasina to step down and to make way for a caretaker government ahead of elections due next year. All 7 MPs from the BNP have resigned. Police stormed the BNP's headquarters earlier this week. At least one person was killed and hundreds of opposition activists were arrested. We'll bring in our guests in just a moment. First, this report from Tanvir Chowdhury in Dhaka.
During the past few months, the government has clamped down on the opposition Bangladesh Nationalist Party. Several people have been shot dead by police, hundreds injured, and thousands have been arrested at rallies across the country. But it didn't stop tens of thousands of opposition supporters from gathering in Dhaka on Saturday.
People don't have any security here. They don't have the right to vote, and they're scared to venture outdoors because of repression. We demand the autocratic government resign immediately.
We want this government to resign and release former Prime Minister Khaleda Zia. We want real democracy.
On Wednesday, shortly after an interview with Al Jazeera, the party's leader, Fakhrul Islam, was arrested along with 500 supporters.
Bangladesh, unfortunately, is facing one of the most severe political crises now because the people of this country are being deprived of their voting rights. Democracy is totally absent now in Bangladesh. Unfortunately, the whole scenario is that just an authoritarian government is ruling this country.
The UN and the US have condemned the violence and called for an investigation, while 12 advocacy groups and rights watchdogs have issued a joint statement expressing concerns about gross human rights violations. In a statement, Amnesty International has accused the government of having, quote, very little regard for human life, saying its action send a chilling message to those who dare exercise their human rights. For its part, the government accuses the opposition of trying to destabilize the country. It says protesters are gathering illegally.
Under no circumstances should there be any disturbance on the roads. People don't want it, nor do want any unruly incidents by blocking roads.
It has also rejected demands for an election-time caretaker government. Security is heavily beefed up all across the capital city, Dhaka. The Bangladesh Nationalist Party, the main opposition party's headquarters, is totally cordoned off by police. No one is allowed in the perimeter. As the economy spirals and the cost of living soars, Bangladesh now faces the additional challenge of growing calls for regime change ahead of the next general elections.
This is Turkana province in the far north of Kenya, but it hasn't rained properly for more than 2 years. The grasslands have turned to dust. It's impossible to grow any food. The women and children have to walk and dig for hours to find water. The men, who normally look after the livestock, are almost at a loss for things to do.
Familia yangu shauri ya nini kwa shauri nakosa kitu kwa family.
How many did you have before?
Kwa samani inakuwa 400. Inakuwa 400 samani.
Turkana's nomadic herdsmen or pastoralists rely on their livestock for food and to sell for cash. But up to 85% of their animals have died during the drought. William spent his life as a herder, but has nothing left to show for it.
Do you think your grandchildren will be able to continue the traditional life that you've lived and your ancestors lived?
Saizi kuzi inaishi maisha ngine. Maisha hakuna nini, hakuna matunda, hakuna nini, maisha tu. Kwa maisha hiyo inaishi namna hiyo na hakuna kitu cha kukula Na wako wapi? Kwa tumbo.
Rebecca is one of the few who still has some goats, but keeping them alive in this landscape has taken its toll.
If it stays like this and the rains don't come for another season, what do you think is going to happen to you and your family?
Living in the far north of Kenya means the only direction Rebecca and thousands of others can go is south, and that takes them into dangerous territory. I'm following the same journey, heading south to the breadbasket of Kenya, Laikipia. It's an area that receives plenty of rain, even when the rest of the country doesn't. But having plenty in a time of drought makes you a target. This is a community under attack. Almost every night, gunfire rings out here as bandits raid the farms, stealing crops and livestock. They cross into the fields from a neighbouring area where they've been illegally grazing their cows.
Are you Wilson?
I'm Wilson.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Shay. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
300 families have been forced from their homes here. Dozens of people have been shot, some killed. Until recently, there was a curfew here to try to contain the violence, but it didn't protect the farmers.
This is your homestead?
This used to be my home. I used to stay here. I have stayed here for more than 20 years. But now I cannot come here without soldiers.
Does it still feel like home?
It's not like a home anymore. You cannot stay here.
Wilson hasn't been back here for weeks, not since his wife was attacked.
She was shot from there.
Right here?
Right here. In the lane, in the mud, just lying down, shouting. I've been killed. I've been killed. You see?
Poor woman.
And the children were inside the home.
What's this?
You can see blood here. You see? Everything. This.
Blood.
Blood. Huh? Blood. But we are praising God because she is alive.
Like other families, they've had to leave and are now staying several miles away.
How are you?
I'm the one who was shot.
Oh dear.
Agnes says she was shot by the armed bandits who came to steal crops from their farm.
We don't have problem with them grazing. The problem is, why do they come and kill us? Why do they come and shoot us?
Do you think this drought is causing more problems for people?
Yeah, they are causing.
Do you feel like you've let your wife down?
Myself, I have not failed. I don't have a gun. I cannot protect her against somebody with a gun.
Speaking to Agnes and her husband, it's really clear that the violence in this area started exactly when the rains failed.
Horrific revelations of grisly genocide. China's war on religion is wiping out millions of Muslim Uyghurs. Which people of faith will be next? The government of China knows that religious belief is the biggest threat to its grip on power. In our top story, CBN's Dale Hurd reports on China's campaign of repression in its war on people of faith.
These mugshots, taken from Chinese police files, show some of the millions of Uyghurs being held in at least 1,200 Chinese concentration camps. Their crimes? They may have had relatives in other countries, or they may have made the mistake of applying for a passport. They may have had more than 3 children. They might be considered too religious, or they've been declared untrustworthy. This has been happening for years in the western Chinese province of Xinjiang, and the world has done almost nothing to stop it. Tersine, a Uyghur, was imprisoned for visiting her family in nearby Kazakhstan.
Our cell was 4 square meters, and there were more than 20 people. And there was only one bucket to be used as a toilet. At night, they would take out some people, especially some young girls, for interrogation. And we could hear their screaming. Some of the girls would bleed very badly. One woman had bite marks all over her body, and sometimes they would die because of the bleeding.
Tersane was gang-raped by prison guards and tortured with electric shocks. Other inmates face forced sterilization, slave labor, and brainwashing. Prisoners are regularly killed so their organs can be harvested.
Everyone, literally every single prisoner, was subject to an organ examination. And after the examination, some people were put on a bus and taken somewhere else.
Those outside the camps live in an Orwellian world of constant surveillance. Authorities have placed QR codes on the outsides of homes that give them information about anyone living inside. And an app on their phone records everything they do. This photo shows the English translation of an app Chinese police use when they question someone. After the person's ID is entered, everything about them pops up on screen, including how much electricity they use. And then the app asks the officer if the person's reaction was normal or abnormal, and if the person requires further investigation. China is using every tool at its disposal in the war on faith. All faiths. Anything that could compete with allegiance to the communist state. China is also imprisoning huge numbers of Falun Gong members, a Buddhist sect, and house church Christians. Former President Trump's ambassador-at-large for international religious freedom, Sam Brownback.
Christians are arrested, pastors are put in jail, whole congregations are forced to go underground. The Uyghurs, even if you're not in the concentration camp, you got a camera for every other person that's there. You got a police station or kind of way station every 50 yards in the major cities. People are tracked constantly. They've taken genetic sampling of everybody. They've got facial recognition systems.
With a government mandate to break their lineage, break their roots, Beijing is using forced sterilization and forced marriages to bring an end to the Uyghurs as a people and a culture. The Prime Minister in exile of East Turkestan, what China now calls Xinjiang, is Salih Hudayar.
So the Chinese government essentially, aside from sterilizing our population, it wants to, breed us out, essentially. So they are forcing young Uyghur women to marry Han Chinese men. And if you refuse, then they're going to send you to a concentration camp and send everyone in your family into a concentration camp.
The man behind this repression is Chinese Politburo member Chen Quanguo, who was so successful in crushing resistance in Tibet that he was sent to Xinjiang to put in place a system to destroy Uyghur culture.
He's the architect. He designed and implemented the takedown of the Tibetan Buddhist system and then got moved to do something similar to the Muslim population. They've taken this very seriously. They fear religion.
Under a program the Chinese government calls Pair Up and Become Family, more than 1 million Chinese party members have been assigned to move into the homes of Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities, spending weeks as uninvited guests monitoring their behavior, sometimes sharing their beds, and trying to convert them to communism. Meanwhile, the victims of Chinese repression feel abandoned by the United States and the world. A recent UN report on China's treatment of the Uyghurs refrained from using the term genocide, even though what China is doing fits the UN's own definition of genocide. Prime Minister Hudayar suspects the UN caved to pressure from China. And after the White House claimed Joe Biden raised the issue of genocide with Chinese leader Xi Jinping recently, the Chinese government insisted that no, he did not. And sanctions by the U.S. and other Western nations have not worked.
You could look at it and say, look, I'm a Christian. It really doesn't apply to me. It does apply to you. Because as soon as they go after one faith group, they're going to go after the next. The target is people of faith. The war is China's war on faith, and it's all faiths.
The American government knows exactly what China is doing to the Uyghurs. The war knows exactly what's happening, and it has done nothing.
America at a crisis point. Social, racial, and political arguments are tearing the country apart. What can heal these divisions? Meet a man who says it's revival or we die. A new global survey reveals that most teens have a positive view of Jesus. The survey questioned about 25,000 teens aged 13 to 17 in 26 countries. The Barna Group reports about half of all teenagers across faith groups describe Jesus as loving. 46% believe he offers hope to people, and 43% believe he cares about them. The survey also showed only 23% believe Jesus makes a real difference in the world today. The same number believe they can have a personal relationship with him. Well, here in America, our country is reeling from political, racial, and social unrest. So what will heal the deep divisions in our nation? Christians believe the answer lies in the hope of a great awakening. In our next report, Charlene Aaron explores what it will take to bring spiritual renewal to America. And we want to know what you think is needed to bring revival to America. So during the story, scan the code you see at the bottom of the screen and send us a video with your thoughts. Here's Charlene.
From the nation's capital to the harvest fields of the Midwest, believers have been crying out to God for spiritual renewal in America. Some believe the nation sits on the brink of collapse, with the only hope being a visitation of God's power and presence.
Revival or we die. That's where you have to get. You have to get to that place where you can't live any longer without visitation. It could be personal. It could be personal revival where you know there must be a breakthrough.
What will heal the deep racial, social, and political divisions that are tearing us apart? In his new book, Revival or We Die, A Great Awakening is Our Only Hope, Dr. Michael Brown says revival is vital to seeing things change.
We're at that critical moment again. America's being torn apart by the seams, and we've seen there are no political solutions, there are no social solutions, and the church itself has become impotent. So we're at a crisis point in American history where without divine visitation, America as we know it could come to an end or could be so marred that the world our kids or grandkids grow up in will be very, very different.
Dr. Corney Becker, Dean of Regent University's School of Divinity, agrees, saying we've reached a time of spiritual reckoning.
But I believe America recognizes that politics cannot save her. Ideology cannot save her. Social change cannot save her. Only the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ.
A student of past revival movements, Becker believes in order to experience true spiritual renewal, the church must first prepare.
So in the past, a lot of Bible projects sometimes skip over some of the problems that we face, and we just like to get to the part where Jesus saves everything. Well, this season, if you're someone who is struggling and you can't seem to be getting answers, you can't seem to be getting relief, and you wonder, why does everyone else on social media seem to be getting relief and answers and comfort when I'm not? We dive deep into that in season 3. Just because people were following Jesus and were with him all the time doesn't mean that their lives got better. And what does that look like when your questions aren't getting answered? And season 3 is really, I believe, going to be a healing opportunity for you if you watch the entire season.
Well, ticket sales for The Chosen Season 3. This month, Christians and Jews worldwide joined together to follow a biblical command. As Chris Mitchell reports, it's all about praying for Jerusalem.
Shalom and welcome everybody to Jerusalem, Israel.
This celebration marks the latest International Day of Prayer for the Peace of Jerusalem. Since 2004, this event has joined millions of Christians and Jews around the world to pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
To fulfill the biblical mandate of Psalm 122:6, pray for the peace of Jerusalem, recognizing that peace in Jerusalem signifies peace for the world. And so the Day of Prayer gathers and empowers Christians around the world to stand in alliance with that promise of God in Psalm 122:6.
Bishop Robert Stearns helped start this effort and says Jerusalem is central to God's plan for the world.
Jerusalem is a plumb line. Jerusalem is a place of covenantal alignment. As goes Jerusalem, as goes Israel, so goes much of our world. And so when we focus in this moment that is both filled with difficulty and promise, let's look at this. We have increased negative attacking rhetoric from Iran, from Syria. We've got all kinds of problems there. But through the Abraham Accords, we have amazing new opportunities for peace. So we have to pray that humanity moves in the direction of peace that has been promised to this land and to this region.
The day brings Jews and Christians together.
The International Day for Prayer for the Peace of Jerusalem is a very important day in the calendar. It codifies the blessing and command to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. What Eagles Wings has done by adding another holiday into the Christian calendar is really unbelievable. And here in Jerusalem, we celebrate it together with our Christian brothers.
Stern says a younger generation is catching the vision of the importance to pray for Jerusalem.
Being a younger man myself, I'm just excited to help inspire others to come and see what is happening here in Israel, to not only come and view it, but take an active role in it. We're here to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. We want to loudly and proudly tell the world that we want to stand with Israel. We want to stand with God in seeing the peace come about here in the land.
Writing says this also sends a strong message to the Jewish people that they are not alone.
I was just talking to a Jewish man here, and he said, I had no idea there were 150 million Christians in China and that many of them are praying for Israel. This is phenomenal. And so it also is helping the people of Israel to realize when they feel so rejected in the media that there are people who love them and stand with them. And it really gives a lot of courage to the people of Israel to hear about this prayer from all over the world.
Thanks so much, Chris. Well, that's going to do it for us. Until next week, goodbye and God bless you.
CNN Money Switzerland is designed to flow through information from the heart of Europe. Watch CNN Money Switzerland.